Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Carlos López Tiboni. Listeners, Carlos is Senior Anti-Doping Manager at the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA. And in our conversation today, we are going to talk more about Carlos's career in anti-doping, as well as anti-doping efforts in the sport of football, or soccer, as we call it here in the United States. So, Carlos, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, Carlos, we are thrilled to have you with us, and we're looking forward to learning more about you and all of the wonderful things going on there at FIFA. So perhaps we could start with your background. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and just how you got interested in sports law and anti-doping?
Definitely. So my background's quite interesting. It's a little bit spread out. I was born in Argentina just over 30 years ago now, and I lived there a few years. I ended up moving to Canada in my early years when I was around 10 years old, and that's where I learned my Canadian English. I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer from very young on, watching those exciting lawyer movies. And initially, I actually wanted to get into criminal law, which I did participate in some limited capacities throughout my earlier educational years and through law school. After law school, I decided that I kind of wanted to make a shift out of criminal and wanted to turn towards football, which, as you said, is soccer here in the US. And I'll probably use those terms interchangeably through today's discussion. Mm-hmm. Initially, interestingly, I actually wanted to get into agency. That's something that really interested me, football agency, and working with players in that regard, negotiating contracts and things like that. Anyways, I did law school in England. After that, I did a master's program in international sports law in Spain, in Madrid. And that was where I started aiming towards getting into sports law. Interestingly, while I was there, I met some great lawyers and lecturers, one of whom came to teach us about anti-doping, which at the time was completely new to me. And if I'm being completely frank, was completely uninteresting to me as well. But he was a great lawyer, a great lecturer, and went through a few days of sessions with him. And towards the end of kind of the academic portion of my master's program, he actually offered me to do an internship at his firm in Toronto. The internships are kind of a mandatory component of the master's program I had been doing. And I had specifically requested the educators or the program managers that I didn't want to go back to Canada. I wanted to stay in Europe and I wanted to work in football more directly. And the internship I had in the moment that was offered to me was to return to Canada and do something else somehow related to football, but really kind of its own thing, which is anti-doping. So looking back now, it's quite funny to think about, but I very hesitantly took the internship. I had an incredible experience participating in that internship. I learned a lot about anti-doping. I learned a lot about different areas of sports law, governance, safe sports, various different human rights related issues in sport, and stayed there for a few years. I got hired on full time. And after that, with the move, FIFA going from Zurich to Miami with its legal department, some openings kind of presented themselves in the anti-doping aspects of FIFA, and I applied and got in. That's kind of how it all fell together.
Very cool. Well, Carlos, I think these different life experiences that you've described brought you all over the world. You mentioned you started in Argentina, Canada, England, Madrid, and Spain. How have these international experiences sort of shaped your perspective as you went through your law career?
I'm certainly incredibly privileged, and that's not lost on me. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have been able to live all of these different life experiences. It's very few people that can say they've lived in 5 different countries and counting, because who knows what the future holds. But I think it's taught me a lot culturally and contextually about how people think about things, how different cultures approach different things, how problems are solved, how conflicts are managed, just viewpoints and perspectives on life and how to live it. And I think that has informed me in the way I carry myself and in the way I practice in my career. I'm fortunate enough to speak fluently both Spanish and English. So that's helped me a lot to connect with different people. It's certainly incredibly helpful in my current role here at FIFA because it just gives me that extra level of connection and communication with different stakeholders.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit more about your current role there at FIFA. We mentioned your title, of course, but can you describe in more detail what you do as the senior anti-doping manager there at FIFA?
Absolutely. So I work here in a team with another anti-doping manager. He's absolutely fantastic as well. His name is Erling Sherga, and he helps me out a lot with the logistical side of things. But essentially my role, I kind of help design and deliver FIFA's anti-doping program across our competitions and our qualifying environments, different tournaments across the world and various different categories and disciplines. So it's really about testing operations. It's about making sure that we're compliant with WADA obligations, regulatory compliance generally. We deal with education, developing and delivering education on anti-doping. There's a lot of stakeholder coordination with all of our member associations, with the confederations. And then, of course, kind of the hot topic right now, and I'm sure it'll get even a hotter topic in the next couple of months, but major event planning and test distribution planning and risk assessments and all that. So as it relates to tournaments like the FIFA World Cup, of course. But really, it's about ensuring that we're running an efficient testing program and that we're doing everything right and complying with all of our obligations in that sense.
Excellent. Well, Carlos, I look forward to digging into some of these details as we go through our conversation. But perhaps to get all of our listeners on the same page, I think many people are familiar with the name FIFA, but can you maybe share just some of the history of the organization and what it looks like today now that you're working there?
I'll kind of caveat this immediately with just saying I'm not a historian and history was never a great topic for me, but I can give you just a little bit of detail. FIFA was founded in 1904. Currently, what it is, it's a global governing body for football. So it's the International Fédération for football, and it essentially makes the rules. It makes the rules for our sports. It governs our sports. Also, there's a massive component, which is the development of our sport at every corner of the world. There's some incredible programs that are made to distribute a lot of the money that's generated from our competitions back to member associations, to grassroots football, to develop not only the sport, but to use the sport as an avenue for education, for improving players' lives and people's lives generally. So that's really what FIFA is in a big picture perspective. We have 211 member associations, meaning depending on the politics of it all, some countries will have various member associations, but essentially we can think of each country having its national federation that's generally equivalent to one member association. And we have 211 members. We work closely with 6 continental confederations. So it's a large global governing body for football.
I think that's phenomenal. And I think, as you sort of alluded to, anti-doping is just a small piece of all of the different things that the team at FIFA there are working on. But can you describe what FIFA's approach is to anti-doping and talk a little bit more about the current anti-doping program there?
Our approach to anti-doping is kind of a holistic one. We want to make sure that our global reach creates global benefits. So we work very closely with our 6 continental confederations. One of the things that I noticed when I joined FIFA just under 2 years ago is that our confederations are very strong organizations as well. FIFA delegates a large part of its obligations, its anti-doping obligations, to the confederations to run anti-doping activities and programs within their own continents. So our approach is really to work very closely with all of our members, all of our stakeholders, the confederations, to create a interconnected global anti-doping program. And really at the heart of it all is, when myself being a fan of the sport, the beauty of football, like any other sport, is the competition. It's the winning, it's the achieving, it's the overcoming of adversity, and knowing that when a team lifts a trophy, that they've done so fairly, protecting that integrity of the sport and of the outcomes. And that's really the approach for FIFA, is making sure that sport is clean and protecting clean athletes and their environments. In terms of our approach, and this is something that I speak about regularly when I'm doing presentations or lectures to different groups, is we kind of have a mission statement, and coming back to this pyramid. Football anti-doping is, we view it as a pyramid, and we structure the program that way. So as I mentioned, we want to keep football free from doping. We want FIFA to be a leader in global anti-doping, and we want to safeguard the success and sustainability of football and clean competition. And so we do this collaborating with our confederations, the various member associations, and WADA, and various other anti-doping organizations. And really the structure that we see is, if we kind of picture this as a pyramid, the base of this pyramid that holds the entire program up is our prevention, which really comes through the form of educational awareness. So this is the absolute foundation of the program. We want our players and our technical staff and our athlete support personnel to be aware and educated on not just anti-doping obligations or responsibilities, but also their good values and why complying with anti-doping shouldn't be kind of an obligation, but it really should be something that they do because that's the right thing to do. And so creating this values-based education is the foundation that we build the entire program on. And then obviously after that, what we have is kind of the second stage, which is our deterrence, which comes through our actual testing. So we deliver our education at the base. Once our education has been delivered, we enforce our regulations through testing, and testing serves a lot of key roles. One of them being obviously to detect doping activity is obviously the primary purpose of testing, but it also is a deterrent. If players know that they'll be tested frequently, that acts as a deterrent. So that is our second step. And then finally, at the very top, we have the more legal aspect of it all, which is the result management. And so that result management is when we have a potential anti-doping rule violation, whether it's a positive test or whether it's something that maybe does not stem from an analytical violation, being able to manage those effectively through the various tribunals and legal avenues. And that's how the entire program is built and oriented with this kind of pyramid in mind.
And that makes sense. And I think for a lot of people, when they hear anti-doping, the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of testing and enforcement, this picture of what anti-doping looks like. So I think this pyramid is really helpful in kind of adding these other very important pieces to FIFA's approach. This idea particularly of education as the foundation and the importance of the value-based culture, really emphasizing respect for the sport and fairness and integrity. So I think having this visual in mind is really helpful. So can you go into a little bit more detail next, perhaps about some of the logistics and talk about the testing and the sample collection and how that works there at FIFA?
Absolutely. So we operate, as I mentioned, kind of on a global stage, and how it works really as the International Federation. If we picture this as kind of as a footballing pyramid, FIFA is at the top point of this pyramid, and foundationally, there are organizations below us that kind of build the foundation. So FIFA, when we think of World Cups, not just the men's World Cup, but also the women's, Club World Cups, youth competitions like our U17 tournaments, our U20 competitions, beach soccer, and futsal World Cups. These are all really kind of the highest level international competitions of our sport. So FIFA's testing really primarily focuses on those events and revolves around those events. We conduct our testing with those events in mind. So for example, a year like this year where we have our premier competition, the Men's Senior World Cup, our testing revolves around those players who are involved in that competition this year. It's not to say that anyone else is kicked to the curb or anything like that in terms of our priority, but of course, it's really competition-oriented testing. And the same way that we do this at our FIFA competitions, our confederations will do it at their international competitions within their continents. And then NATO's will be involved in testing kind of at national level within their country. So it all really is part of this larger web where FIFA kind of sits at the highest elite international level. And we do our testing around there. And so something that's interesting is our status with WADA. We are the direct signatory that represents football with WADA. And the confederations are delegated third parties that do a lot of testing on our behalf within their own continents. In terms of, I think the best way to describe our testing program is it's not just a FIFA testing program, but it's a football testing program. And it includes the testing activities of our confederations as well. In this way, we reach every corner of the globe. We have testing on players in the Oceania region. It can go anywhere from American Samoa to CONCACAF with teams in Canada to Chile and CONMEBOL, teams in Africa and Asia and Europe. So it's a huge wide net that's included in it. Just in terms of some numbers, for example, as an international federation, from the team perspective, we do the most testing of any other team sport. We collected in 2024, I think we did just over 10,000 samples, including the testing that's conducted by the confederations. And we work with dozens of WADA-accredited labs. It's a big project. Of the 211 member associations in 2024 and 2025, roughly 80% of our member associations had at least one player tested during our last reporting period. So we reach every corner, really, of the globe.
Certainly. And we kind of honed in there on testing. You mentioned education earlier, and I think this is a tremendously important component of different anti-doping programs. So can you talk a little bit more about FIFA's educational efforts surrounding anti-doping?
Our education efforts, because of the reach and kind of the scale of our sports, it can be quite challenging, the educational aspect of it. And our philosophy is always that any player, regardless of their level, the first time they ever encounter anti-doping, it should be education rather than a doping control officer or a sample collection room. For us, that's very important for a variety of different reasons. And education, I think, is the primary pillar that really holds the entire anti-doping program up. So our education is various components. One, we reach out directly to teams and FIFA competitions when they're either arriving or when we know they're going to be competing at any of our events. There's information and correspondence kind of circulated to different teams, to players, to member associations. We do kind of ad hoc educational sessions with teams who are arriving at different host nations for competitions. And now with the new, which I'm sure you know, 2027, there's going to be a major update to the World Anti-Doping Code and the international standards. So we're developing a much more robust education program that's going to involve direct contribution from all of our member associations. And we're going to develop educational programs that can be delivered directly to players at our member associations on an annual basis instead of just when they're set to compete in FIFA competitions. Another really interesting education program that we have is our FIFA Anti-Doping Executive Program, which is not really aimed so much at the athletes and the teams, but it's actually aimed much more towards the practitioners in the anti-doping space. So, for example, we just completed the third edition of this program, which it spanned 3 in-person modules, which were hosted in Miami, Paris, and Zurich at our various FIFA offices. And this is a program where lawyers from either leagues or member associations or teams, doctors or football administrators, I think we had some arbitrators as well join us. And it's a 101 course, introduction to anti-doping and how anti-doping works from a practitioner's perspective. So we talk about what is anti-doping, what is WADA, how do these institutions interact at the international level with NATOs and with international federations. We have experts from the Council of Europe. We have experts who are involved at various NATOs. We have lawyers who practice in doping-related cases. We have members from WADA who came to lecture on their role. We had someone from the ITA. We had myself and Erling, my counterpart here at FIFA, discuss the complexities of our role and how we manage cases and logistics and testing. So that's actually a really fun educational program that we host, and it's open to anyone who applies. There's an application that they have to go through, but we host this once every 1 to 2 years, and it's a fun way to teach practitioners as well about our anti-doping program and anti-doping generally at the international level.
Fantastic. Well, Carlos, it sounds like there are some exciting changes on the horizon on the educational front. So we look forward to hearing more about those as they progress. But let's talk a little bit more about this move that you alluded to previously. So FIFA had been headquartered in Zurich, but relatively recently in 2024, the FIFA anti-doping unit actually moved to Florida. So can you give us a little bit of insight into why this move occurred and what some of the impacts have been for you and your anti-doping unit?
I think the major driver to move the legal and compliance department to FIFA was part of, I think, the current president's philosophy to expand football's reach across the world. So Miami is not the only place where FIFA has now opened up an office. There's offices in Paris, there's offices in Morocco. As we know, there's kind of the HQ in Zurich. And I think really the major driver was to kind of expand football's reach, as the president likes to say, to make football truly global. And to make those expansions out here is certainly a contributing factor to that kind of end philosophy. I think also, just given the fact that we're hosting the World Cup here in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, Miami served as a great proximity point to the major venues, to the local organizing committees. So it made it easier to kind of have meetings and set up our operational planning and all that good stuff.
Very cool. So let's dig into some of the detail then about the anti-doping unit. What makes FIFA's anti-doping unit unique in the world anti-doping multi-sport global stage?
I want to continue to sound humble as much as I can, but I do think that one of the major differentiators from FIFA and our anti-doping unit to maybe other sports is absolutely the scale. We have 211 member associations. Football is the most popular sport in the world based on a bunch of different metrics. There's 6 large continental confederations that are operating in each continent, also hosting very important competitions with high viewership. So we have approximately 4,000 professional clubs just on the men's side across the world. That includes over 120,000 professional players. Again, that includes our 211 national member associations and the 6 continents and all the competitions, the various different disciplines. So we have the beach soccer, the futsal, we have the different age categories. So really, one of the things that makes us unique in terms of our anti-doping is that massive scale. It's a huge worldwide sport with significant competition everywhere. And I think that's what makes it very unique. It creates for us very interesting challenges when it comes to geography and logistics. We compare, for example, Europe and the types of logistics that are required to conduct testing and transport samples, maybe from Spain to Germany, is very different from moving samples from Samoa to Australia, for example, or conducting testing in those types of regions. So I think that's absolutely the most unique component for us is the vast network that we deal with and the very unique regional challenges in each of the corners of the globe that we have to operate within.
Definitely. I can imagine a lot of different ways that this scale can create challenges. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about the challenges that FIFA faces related to doping and anti-doping, because I think there are a lot of difficulties that the field as a whole is working to address. So are there particular challenges that you're facing right now related to doping or anti-doping? And can you talk a little bit about how you, your team, and just FIFA overall are working to address some of these problems?
Education is certainly one of our biggest challenges. It's being able to get to grassroots young players in different countries of the world and making sure that they receive the appropriate education before they are subject to doping controls. As I'm sure you and probably a lot of the listeners know, the anti-doping rules can be very strict and equally unforgiving as it relates to inadvertent doping. Obviously, there are avenues by which the regulations, CAS jurisprudence has created these little carve-outs to reduce sanctions in certain situations depending on fault. But the reality is that we're operating under a strict liability regime where athletes, regardless of intent, are responsible and subject to very significant sanctions if they are caught doping. So education for us is one of the primary concerns. It's making sure that we have athletes who understand what they can and can't take. Obviously, the values-based is the primary concern, making sure that athletes don't want to cheat because it's the wrong thing to do. But also beyond that, making sure that athletes don't accidentally get caught in the anti-doping web for inadvertent doping or accidental doping. And this is something that we've seen quite frequently. It's probably the most common explanation that we receive both at the FIFA level and in cases at the confederation level when athletes test positive is that they either didn't know that they were taking substances that were prohibited. And even in some cases, we've seen this a few times where players were taking medications. They didn't understand the regulations around therapeutic use exemptions. And so they think that just having a prescription is sufficient. And then they're actually even declaring prohibited substances on their doping control forms, which can be indicative that they genuinely don't realize that they might be committing doping violations. And so that's a huge problem for us. And it is part of the incentive for us to expand our education and make it more robust and more far-reaching for sure.
Definitely. I think you brought up so many good points there, Carlos. Just this idea of making sure all of the athletes have familiarity with what is on the WADA prohibited list, and then also just the processes and procedures if someone needs to take a particular medication, and also just understanding the risks of things like supplements and this idea of inadvertent doping, where even if they feel like they're doing everything right, there are still risks involved. So I think this education piece is absolutely critical. And I think in doing the work that you do there at FIFA, you mentioned that there are a lot of stakeholders that you manage, and I think this is the case for a lot of different anti-doping organizations. So can you maybe go into a little bit more detail next about how FIFA does work with some of the partner organizations? So whether it's interactions with the PCC, WADA, different national anti-doping organizations, as well as these continental confederations that you've mentioned, or others within the anti-doping community, just to make sure that your anti-doping program is maximally effective?
I think partnership and collaboration is our number one strength at FIFA and in football and anti-doping internationally in general. We have a very, very close relationship with WADA. We are in communication with them on a daily basis. We participate in their events. They're obviously invited to participate in ours. We host meetings quite frequently on different topics. We accept their feedback on our testing program. We accept their feedback on our risk assessments, our education delivery. So we certainly take the approach that we are stronger together through collaboration. WADA is absolutely kind of one of those primary partners for us. And then with the NATOs, the partnership is also quite strong. We rely on the NATOs to help us. Again, going back to this global scale of our program, it is quite helpful to have NATOs locally on the ground that understand well the practices within their own countries, the logistics within their own countries, how to manage different aspects of testing within their own countries. And a lot of times we'll even delegate testing to them. So we'll say we have these teams or players that we're looking to test ahead of this major competition. We know that many of them are situated in local competitions within your country, and we work out agreements where they will conduct the sample collection under our testing authority, and they'll help us in that sense. So the NATOs are incredibly helpful. We've had some very strong partnerships with many different NATOs from all over the world. Just as an example, during the FIFA Club World Cup last summer, we had a very strong partnership with USADA, who helped us conduct out-of-competition testing here in the US. And we're actually going to continue that partnership with them, but also expanding it to Canada and Mexico and their NATOs for the FIFA World Cup this summer. And beyond that, we have NATOs all over the world who are helping us to conduct out-of-competition testing on players and teams that we know are qualified and expected to play at the tournament. So the collaboration with the NATOs is essential for our programs. And then one of our major collaborations also comes through our confederations. Our confederations are a massive benefit to us, and we like to be a benefit to them as well where we can, but they have incredibly robust anti-doping programs. UEFA, CONMEBOL, and the AFC really kind of set the benchmark for effective testing and education distribution. And then we work also closely with CONCACAF, with the AFC, and with the OSC. They also have incredibly impressive programs, and they are growing quite impressively as well.
Very cool. And I understand actually just recently you had a meeting. You met with these 6 continental confederations to discuss anti-doping in more detail in advance of the FIFA World Cup 2026. So Carlos, can you talk a little bit more about this meeting and what were some of the goals that you went into it with and some of the outcomes that you came out of the meeting with?
Absolutely. So we're entering now a new WADA code cycle in 2027, which means the WADA code is going to, well, it's already been updated and approved, and it's going to enter into force in 2027. And that's also going to include updates to all of the international standards. So one of the goals of our meeting with all of the confederations was to align and coordinate on making sure that we're staying WADA compliant and that we're updating all of our programs individually, but also together to make sure that we're still compliant with all of the requirements that we need under the WADA code and the international standards. And then obviously the minor detail of a competition that we'll be hosting this summer, which is the FIFA World Cup here in North America, kind of strengthening the coordination. The confederations, just like the NATOs, assist us in testing and test distribution ahead of major tournaments. They are heavily involved in testing at our World Cup qualifiers. They're heavily involved in assisting us with out-of-competition testing within their regions on players that we know will be participating at our competitions. So that was another one of our major goals. And then something that I'm personally very, very excited about too is we have decided to start putting together the building blocks for a football anti-doping expert group. And really the primary objective of this expert group is to unify international football as one voice in anti-doping that's coordinated and collaborating. And I think a lot of times football has a lot to contribute to the ongoing conversation in international anti-doping. And I think we're well placed to do so with all of the expertise, not just from FIFA, but from all of the confederations and then all of the regional knowledge and contextual expertise that working in these different regions of the world brings to the conversation. So that's something that's very exciting for us. And we're very happy we were able to put it together. It kind of all comes back to this theme of collaboration being our strength. And I think bringing everyone together in a group like this is going to benefit us immensely moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think these expert groups are such a wonderful way to, like you said, bring all of these different perspectives together, but really dedicate focused time to think about these big issues, because I think it's so busy in your everyday life. You don't often get a moment to really focus on what we can do now to make the future better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. It's very exciting. I think, as I mentioned, all of the confederations have a lot to contribute to international anti-doping. They have incredible expertise. And this being a very niche kind of area of sports, regionally, it becomes even more niche. And bringing everyone together is only going to stand to benefit not just football, but any other international federation that wants to collaborate with us and coordinate with us. And we have these types of meetings with other international federations, and the conversation is always ongoing with all these different potential partners as well.
Absolutely. And I know, as we've sort of alluded to throughout our conversation, now is a particularly busy time for you, for FIFA, because this World Cup is coming just around the corner there in June and July this summer. So how does your team, Carlos, prepare for this kind of a major event from an anti-doping perspective?
First and foremost, we drink a lot more coffee. That generally gets us started. But the major events are heavy logistical and operational moments for us. It really is a lot of work on test distribution and risk assessments and managing all of the different moving parts. So just like we did at the FIFA Club World Cup last summer, at the FIFA World Cup, we'll be doing a lot of testing. Certainly every player can expect to be tested, probably multiple times as well. And that includes a huge coordination of logistics. We have doping control officers at every venue city. We have doping control officers contributing from Mexico, US, and the Canadian NATOs. We have logistics partners that are going to be doing overnight shipping and the handling of all of our samples. We have coordination with customs agencies. Obviously, our WADA accredited labs become a huge partner in these moments. They impressively also not only can handle these high volumes of samples in a short period of time, but they can also analyze them and report back to us within 24 to 48 hours in some cases. So it's quite impressive considering the volume that they're going through. And then it just really, we work closely also, even with medical. Our medical teams assist us in venues, our competition and team services, venue management, things that might not seem intuitive, but putting together a doping control room on the fly in a training venue or in a hotel where we're trying to do so without teams and players knowing that we're coming. These are all kind of heavy logistical things that we have to coordinate in different venues in different cities, all at the same time in a close period of time. And again, a high volume of testing that's happening in a short period of time. So it's a lot of work, but it's incredibly rewarding. And in terms of some of the more focused preparations for these types of major events, like, for example, the World Cup, we revisit the training and accreditation of all of our doping control officers. So that's something we did, for example, earlier this year. We hosted all of our doping control officers in our offices in Zurich, and we had kind of a refresher course and reaccreditation program on everything doping control process related. We had our lock-on anti-doping kit supplier attend as well. We had our virtual doping control form supplier, Modoc, attend, and we go through the practicalities of doing the doping control tests, taking urine, taking blood, using our kits, using our doping control forms, revisiting our procedural manuals on what to do and what not to do, how to deal with players if they're being difficult or not, and then training all of our DCOs again and reaccrediting them. So that was a project that we were very excited to do. And we'll do something very similar, even though we've just completed this a few months ago. We'll do something similar with all of the DCOs that have actually been selected to attend the World Cup and conduct our missions on the ground here. They'll be arriving ahead of time in Miami, where we'll be doing a crash course on everything anti-doping procedures related. We'll be making sure that they are completely clear on our procedures, on all of our kits and how to use them, onboarding everyone. And then distributing them to their various venues and cities where they'll be conducting the majority of their missions. So that's an example of the type of tournament-specific preparations that we have ahead of these types of competitions. I think it's very exciting from a personal perspective. Obviously, we get to work with the most elite teams on the planet, and that also includes the most elite players. So it's interesting seeing from kind of the behind the scenes perspective, how all of that comes together and the interactions between our doping control officers and team medical staff and putting everything together and how helpful even the teams can be, especially at these types of competitions where these players have been tested and these teams have been tested so many times. They know what's happening. They know how to deal with it. And they're so cooperative as well. So it's a lot, but it's really rewarding in the end.
Definitely. And as you alluded to, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to prepare for the event. But I think one of the other challenges about the FIFA World Cup specifically is that it goes on for over a month. So it is a long event. So what does your team's involvement look like during a major event like the FIFA World Cup that goes on for quite some time?
So we are operating out of our base here in Miami, and we are really just locked into the operations of it all. So we're communicating with our DCOs, we're communicating with our venue managers, we're communicating, as I mentioned, with the logistics companies to make sure everything's coordinated. When the samples are getting collected, who's picking them up, who's shipping them where, has the lab received them, yes or no? And also, part of the nature of it all is dealing with any potential concerns or complaints that you might get from the member associations or their teams or their coaches. Obviously, these moments, of course, from a fan's perspective, this is a fun competition. It's very exciting and it's very entertaining. But for the teams and the players, these are very stressful, all-in moments for them. So there's a lot going on. They're competing in the most important competitions of their careers. And so that creates heightened emotions, heightened frustrations at times. And managing all of that with the players and with the teams is a huge part of what we do. We also obviously supervise all of our operations. So we'll be on site at venues from time to time, different venues, just managing everything, speaking with who we need to speak to, and just making sure that everything's running smoothly. Obviously, crisis management is a huge part of that. We do everything we can to get ahead of any potential crisis, but with so many moving parts, sometimes requires a little bit of extra effort if something comes up, and we're there to assist in those situations as well.
Definitely. And Carlos, I know this is a very busy time for you and for FIFA overall. And of course, the World Cup right now is top of mind. But what are some of FIFA's anti-doping priorities looking forward past the World Cup?
Maintaining this strong, globally harmonized testing and compliance framework is really important for us. So continuing to strengthen our confederation relationships and our collaboration with NATO is certainly a primary aspect of what we want to keep prioritizing moving forward. There's also, as I mentioned before, the educational aspect. We want to keep strengthening our education, and we want to make sure that we are expanding the reach of our education to the smallest grassroots levels at all of our member associations, kind of disciplines and age groups. We want to make sure that we are expanding and strengthening our education into the younger age groups, like our U17s and our U20s. I think that's the best players to really focus our values-based teaching. And then learning from our major events and improving our testing logistics. There's always learning moments in all of these major competitions when things come up. And so we take all of them, we do a debrief, we see how things can be improved or how certain risks can be mitigated moving forward, and then we implement it at the next competition. Something that's worth mentioning too is I think a lot of people don't realize that, of course, we have these big competitions like the Men's World Cup this summer. Like we're hosting 5 to 10 other competitions this year alone. So it's a constant moving program. We go from one to the next and coordinating all of this and making sure that we're staying on top of everything and providing the best testing program that we can at every competition is a continuous effort. So that's absolutely a priority as well.
Well, it sounds like you don't get much of a break then before you have to kind of pick everything up again and get moving. But I think that keeps it exciting. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about anti-doping is just how quickly everything is advancing. And particularly on the research side, as you know, that's a passion for the Partnership for Clean Competition. So Carlos, can you share why you think it's important to continue investing in and advancing anti-doping science?
I think improved science improves detection. It increases deterrence and it increases the fairness of the competition and therefore our confidence in the merits of the results and the system generally and the sport generally. Strong science means strong anti-doping program. And the reality is that there are athletes out there who want to gain an unfair advantage and they are constantly seeking new ways to do that. And so the science needs to keep up with them to make sure that we can continue to protect clean sport. So these are conversations that we're constantly having with experts, including the WADA labs. They're great. We have an amazing partnership with the WADA accredited lab in Lausanne and the folks there. And we're constantly working with them to see how we can assist and support and help to fund different types of research projects that are not just beneficial to global football, but to sport generally.
I love that. And I think it is so important to continue, like you said, advancing the science so that we can keep up with the new ways that people are finding to try to get an unfair advantage. And I think this is a challenge in anti-doping, but oftentimes you don't always have all of the resources you need to solve every challenge you want to solve. So if we took away the barriers, Carlos, that normally hold you back and you had all of the resources you can dream up, what is the one problem in anti-doping that you would most want to solve?
Without sounding like a broken record, I think education is absolutely the number one thing that I would love to solve if we had the resources. And it's not necessarily just a resource issue, but it's also a complex issue. So if it was something that we could solve, I think, again, because education is the foundation of the entire anti-doping program, if you can have a strong foundation, then the rest becomes much easier. If we have effective education that really lands with players, and if we can really instill good values in players from the beginning, then ideally that means that our testing will reflect that. It means that our incidence rate of adverse findings or atypical findings or whatever it might be, any other kind of anti-doping rule violations would reflect education by seeing less of those violations occurring. And not just from the intentional cheaters, but also increasing education in a way that we are able to protect athletes from inadvertent doping as well, so that we see less instances of players who are taking medications for genuine therapeutic purposes without realizing they're banned, or players who don't realize that they have to be personally responsible for medication, even if it's provided to them by a team doctor, for example. So one of the things that I would love to fix is increased education and reducing the instances of anti-doping violations as a result.
Definitely. Well, Carlos, I think you brought up some really great points there. And we really appreciate the work that you and FIFA are doing to chip away at this really big and complicated problem, like you mentioned, because I think you're doing some phenomenal work to advance anti-doping education. And this is going to be a global effort that I think everybody has to sort of band together to continue to work on over the years. So we appreciate you sharing that. We appreciate you sharing your perspectives and all of this great information with us during our conversation today. But if our listeners want to learn more about you and more about FIFA, what is the best way for them to get more information?
Following FIFA on our social media channels will expose them to the sport generally, but we routinely publish anti-doping updates, for example, on FIFA's LinkedIn website. I also encourage anyone who's interested to find me on LinkedIn as well, where I'm regularly posting updates on our anti-doping program. We also have the FIFA anti-doping website, which they can use to learn the basics and essentials, and they'll have access to our anti-doping reports, our regulations, and different kind of educational videos on different aspects of our anti-doping program. So those are certainly really good starting points. And then, of course, once they've got me on LinkedIn, I always appreciate speaking with people who have questions, who want to learn more, or who want to get more involved. And so that's a great avenue as well.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely take a moment to get connected to Carlos and to FIFA on LinkedIn. Make sure you check out their website. And Carlos, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and thanks for everything. And hopefully this exposes more people to our very niche world and we can continue the education effort.
That's right. Well, wonderful to learn more about you and your work. And listeners, it's been great to have you here with us as well. If you haven't already, we would love it if you could take a moment to rate our podcast, leave a review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and/or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.